Aubrey Sampson is a speaker, pastor, podcaster, and author, writing regularly for Christine Cain's Propel Women and has contributed for Proverbs 31 and Voskamp's A Holy Experience in Christianity Today. And she's the author of The Louder Song, Listening for Hope in the Midst of Lament, but has now written a kids' book to help them understand their big feelings and know that God is with them. It's Big Feelings Day, and hello and welcome, Aubrey.
Hey, Care, thanks so much for having me. I love that you said that, because even hearing you say she's written her first kids book, I'm like, I actually have. That's so exciting. So I like hearing it announced, but thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit about a lament in just a few seconds,
yeah.
But I do want to know, I mean, obviously the excitement because it is new. What actually inspired you to write this book?
It's actually connected to lament. So I love that you asked that question. Like you said, one of my hats that I wear, I'm a teaching pastor at a church here in West Chicago where my husband and I live. And there was a family in our church who had a stillborn baby a few years ago.
Wow.
And they have little kids at home and little kids who were, of course, anticipating the birth of their baby sister. And as they were in the process, and are still, of course, in the process of their grief and their season of heartache and lament, they reached out to me just to sincerely saying, look, there's all kinds of resources for us as the adults, as the moms and dads. We can't find anything for our kiddos who are hurting, who are grieving this. And so I went on an actual, I was searching Amazon, I was calling children's pastors I know, and I called my publisher, believe it or not. And I said, look, I am looking for a resource here. I can't find anything. Surely you know something. Please send me a list. They called me maybe an hour later and they were like, you need to write this book. And it was just a moment where I felt like, I need to write this book. I've written a lot on the concept of lament, which we can talk about for adults, but I've never, there's not a lot out there on how kids can cry out to God in their heartache and their pain and their grief. And so it was born from a really, obviously a terrible tragedy in the life of our church and this precious family. But I think what the book is now is a beautiful resource, not just for kids in grief, but kids who have big feelings all around and don't know what to do with them. The book has ideas for how they can talk to Jesus, what they can actually do physically with their bodies when they're feeling big feelings. But of course, I want it to be kind of a lament book for kids, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and do you feel that lament's just not something talked about enough in the church? Because as a worship leader, I've talked to other worship leaders who say, even in our Sunday morning worship set, there should be a song in there for lament because we're all feeling it. So, yeah.
I am so glad you bring this up. This is actually one of my biggest kind of passions for especially the church in the West. I just don't think we've understood or been formed spiritually in the spiritual discipline and biblical language of lament. And I think you're exactly right. We don't sing any lament songs. And I don't think we need to do it every Sunday. I mean, people might be too depressed, but there are seasons of life that, one, it's biblical, it's historical, we all go through it, it's anecdotal, where we need to understand that it is not just okay, but actually part of a growing, thriving, intimate relationship with God to cry out to Him in lament, to say, God, where are you? God, how long, oh Lord, is this going to last? And I think if we can form our Christianity, our communal experiences better, deeper in lament, then I actually think when we hit really, really hard times, we're not going to be so torn apart. We're not going to see people walking away from faith, walking away from God, because they'll have the tools like, oh, wait, I know I can join in with sufferers around the globe and throughout biblical history and cry out to the God who wants my tears and can hold them and will love me in the middle of them. Yeah. So I'm with you. Yes, we need more lament in the church.
I think Christine Cain's endorsement of your book actually sums it up really well because she says, in lament and just these feelings that we have, whether they're emotional or joyful or whatever, these big feelings that we talk about in the book, she says, we got to know that they're not a barrier between us and God, but actually a pathway to intimacy. So explain what your hope is with this book when it comes to kids specifically in that nature.
One of the things my husband said when he first read the book was that He said, "You've written the book for my inner child who was never told it was okay to have big feelings."
Yeah.
And, wasn't allowed to get angry, wasn't allowed to cry, wasn't allowed to express kind of what a lot of people would say are negative emotions. And I'm putting that in quotes for people who are listening and not watching, negative emotions. And so what I felt like would be just this beautiful invitation was both for parents who are reading this book, caretakers who are reading this book, grandparents who are reading this book, and for the little kids that are inheriting the words of the book and holding the words of the book to know that, look, Jesus, no matter what you're feeling, Jesus, one, loves you. Jesus is not afraid of those big feelings. Jesus has big feelings himself, and Jesus wants to be there in the midst of your big feelings. So it's what I wanted to do was to create some freedom. Like, look, we don't have to pretend, even at an early age, we don't have to pretend when it comes to God. We can trust that Jesus created our big feelings. Jesus is with us in our big feelings, and we can express those feelings to Jesus. And my little secret message is to parents too, like, this is for you too, you guys.
Who is, other than your husband, who you just mentioned, who else in your life has big feelings?
Yeah. So my sister is actually, my sister is married and she has 2 stepsons, and they are 5 and 3. They've actually read the book, but they have really big feelings. And she was like, they need this book, but they've actually gotten to read it and they love it. And I mean, I have big feelings. I think we all do, but I also, for this family in our church, for my nephews, for my husband, and really for any caretaker who's got just, people know, hey, I've got a big feelings kid. They express a lot, they're holding a lot, they feel a lot. And I think the bigger thing for me, Care, is I want them to know Jesus in the midst of it. I want them to have a visual representation of Jesus who loves them and is with them and welcomes them and is excited. And some of the early feedback I've gotten from, like, some of the publishers at the publishing house, their kids have read it. Their kids are like talking about Jesus and being introduced to Jesus in a new way. And that to me is a gift that I didn't even prepare for, honestly.
I love that. Well, as we wrap up, because I know you already touched on this, we talk a lot in the book about, again, God's role in it and where Jesus is in those feelings. You have really good descriptors that help kids actually identify what they're feeling, including some physical descriptions too, physical feelings. I want to get to the practical though, and you did touch on this at the beginning. You get some exercises here on what kids can do. So do you want to touch on maybe your favorite?
I would love to do that. And some of this is I worked pretty closely with a couple children's therapists just to be like, can you give me language and some practical ideas so that I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere? Like, certainly it's biblical, but also give me some expertise, right? And these are Christian friends of mine who practice therapy. But one of the things that they talked about is, we do, even as adults, we're being taught when we're stressed, when we're feeling anxious, when we have big feelings, to do like, deep breathing, right? Slow breathing. Some people might call that 4 square breathing, where you're breathing in for 2 counts, breathing out for 2 counts. And one of the things that I thought would be helpful with kids is not just breathe slowly, kids. That's a little boring. But what if you imagine you're blowing out a birthday cake? So you take a really big, inhale in, and then you blow out the birthday cake. And when you're blowing out those candles on the cake, you're imagining you're giving your feelings to Jesus. And, there's really, it's interesting because there's ancient traditions that go way back, people who have prayed breath prayer, Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. And so even just taking that little thing, kids, imagine you're blowing out a birthday candle or several birthday candles on a cake. That's a way to kind of enter in some of these ancient practices without making it too overly heady for kids and really applicable for kids.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Well, people are going to have to look at it to see all the other exercises. That's right. But there's a lot in the book. I when I was reading it, I was like, it just keeps going. But there's you cover it all. And I appreciate that, because I think kids really just need to be able to identify what they're feeling. And like you said, have permission to feel those things. Yeah. So appreciate it. It's called Big Feelings Day, a book about hard things, heavy emotions, and Jesus' love. Aubrey Sampson. Thank you so much, Aubrey.
Thanks, Care, for having me.